What's happening, everybody? Welcome to the lab. I'm your host, Joshua Diaz. We got a great, interesting show for you tonight. We are going to talk a little bit about the Alec Murdoch case. And, you know, one of the people that covered it really well while it was going on was our good friend over at the interview room, Chris McDonough. And I was going to talk about it by myself tonight. And then I said, you know what? Let me see if Chris wants to come. Like the old days, Chris. It's just us here hanging out. And that's exactly what I thought too. I said, like, yeah, it's like the old days. But good to be. It's good. Good to have you here, Chris. Good to be here with you. If you haven't subbed up to the interview room, by the way, fantastic show last night. Coop and Dean, you know, two of the best. You know, you got a profiler, and then you guys are all the sort of run that cold case foundation over there. So great show last night. Really enjoyed it. How are you? I think I got you muted. You're unmuted.
How about that?
Much better.
There you go. Thanks. Thanks so much for inviting me, Josh. I mean, I look forward to chit-chatting here. And what's up, lab rats? Great to see you guys.
Well, you know, I had a bunch of your guys on just the other day. And you know, you were the first one that I invited, but you know, you were out of town on a thing. And so, you know, completely understood. But it, you know, John and Bob and Gary, you know, are, you know, they were stellar. The audience really appreciated it and enjoyed it. And so thank you.
Once again, have them on more often. They're good people.
They're
great friends.
They're good, very smart. And it was cool because they got to answer a lot of questions that were just kind of, you know, just law enforcement questions that, you know, nothing in particular, some regarding Nancy's case. We talked Murdaugh a little, which we'll talk tonight. But you know, we talked many things, so it was a great show. But yeah, like Kelly says there, it wasn't the same without Chris. I would agree with you on that. So anyway, any you got any shows coming up soon, or are you on Wednesday, or are you on Sunday?
Well, I can't talk about it yet, but I've got hopefully
a barn burner.
Yeah, it should change a couple of things on Sunday. But I may do a couple of things this week, you know.
So keep those notifications on.
Well, you know, I've kind of slowed down a little bit in terms of, you know, my other work outside of the Cold Case Foundation. And so I'm having a little more time to concentrate on YouTube, which is, you know, always fun.
Definitely.
You know, we're headed to CrimeCon. Are you going?
I'm not going. I was just informed that I can't make it. I can't get anybody to stay with the dogs or my grandmother. My sister is having surgery that week, And so,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it was a bummer, but I've been talking to Gary about the next one, and hopefully that's the one. I think that, I think that all three of us are going to hook up on. So, when are you leaving?
So Karen and I are going to be there Friday, Saturday, and come back Sunday.
Okay. Very cool.
But so we'll be there Thursday night, and we're hoping to get, just kind of do our own little thing. Again, we're just going to walk around, meet and greet, hang out, hopefully, get to see a bunch of people, shake hands, kiss babies, pass out swag. Got a bunch of swag that I bought.
Some cantankerous Chris.
Yeah. Well, it's the least that we can do. I mean, it's right. It's the audience that makes all the difference, and that's the one place that we have found that we get to interact with people and meet them, and they get to meet us. And crazy story, the other day we had to go down to San Diego, and while I was there, I was in a grocery store, and this gal, came up and she goes, "I know who you are." And I'm like, I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go. Right. Actually, I had two interactions. I had one guy, we were my brother-in-law had surgery on his knee. And so we went down there, Karen went down, we went to support him. And long story short, I'm standing outside at this restaurant, this sushi restaurant. And this gentleman's on the phone, and he gets off the phone. He finishes his phone call, and he walks over to me and he goes, "I know you." And I'm like, oh boy, it's either the post office, the FBI. I've been trying to avoid them as long as I can. My picture's on the wall at every post office. And I'm thought, okay, here we go.
Post office.
And I'm like, oh, really? I said, from where? And he leans over and he goes, "OPD." I'm like, oh, crap. Right? Here we go.
Yeah, I bet you made some friends down there.
And he's like, I'm Frank's son from Anita's. I said, "Anita's restaurant?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, my favorite lunch spot." And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "I was younger at the time, but I used to see you all the time in there with your guys and gals." And I said, "Oh, that's awesome. How's your dad?" And his dad passed away. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." So if you ever want an amazing food and you're in Southern California, go to Anita's restaurant. So anyway.
Okay. Very cool. So you thought you maybe had arrested him or his one of his family members at one time. Maybe he was in a gang or something. You never know who you're running.
You never know. And Karen and I have this little thing, even all of our kids, when everybody was home, we just had this thing that they knew. I had a signal that, you just go that way and I'll handle business over here.
And I'm sure that you've had that happen where somebody who you had interacted with in the past who wasn't particularly fond of law enforcement. And I think that happens quite often, especially when you're in an area for a very long time. Police, you get to know people and they get to know you. And so.
Well, exactly. And this is one of the things that, you have to be ready. I have multiple friends that I, attach myself on the hip, and Mr. Sig Sauer,
yeah,
365X.
Yeah, and you can because of your law enforcement background and things like that you can go anywhere with that, correct?
HR 218 is the code.
Yeah. Well, as somebody who I don't think people realize what a circus Oceanside was the times that you were down there, that you and John, and it was a chaotic time, wasn't it?
Oh, the 80s and the 90s was, insanity. I mean, it was kind of fun, a lot of fun. But, if you look back over time, I'm sure John's talked a bunch about this stuff, as well, but our generation, we were able to take um, off of the 60s and the 70s, that part of Oceanside, Southern California, where we were, it was extremely violent and entertaining. I mean, I worked, but I was in patrol from 1982 to 89, but 2 of those years I spent undercover in Vice, 84 to 86, and then I got rotated into the dog unit from 86 to 90, and then I went into the bureau from 1990 on, and so it was kind of a really interesting time because when I first started as a rookie, it was just rock and roll. I mean, you have 50,000. Think about this: you have 50,000 Marines. I mean, we're talking war fighters, right? The United States Marine Corps. Okay.
Yeah. Good luck.
Those guys are serious business. Okay.
Yeah, and they're wound. Some of them are wound tight too.
Well, yeah. And then you have, the Navy down in, San Diego, 32nd Street, Coronado, all the SEALs. And they all come up north to the bars in Oceanside. And we had strip clubs, we had X-rated movie theaters, bookstores, you name it. It was all there, bars up the wazoo. We go to 7, 8 fights, a shift, a night. And I'm not just talking about, hey guys, let's, hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I'm talking about, the 1st Marine Division, who are just getting drunk and all they want to do is, fight. And then you've got the Navy guys who, they're all holding their honor, and we'd get in the middle of it and try to break it up or at least send them home or, meaning back to the base. And at that time when I first started, we had the MPs, military police out in town. And we had what they call a downtown service post and, kind of like a paddy wagon thing where you could just hook and book. And my record when I was in Vice, I had a partner named Dave Larson. I choked out 6 people in a single shift.
God.
Now think about that. That was when I was dumb and young, right? I mean, I'm still dumb, but I was a lot younger, and I was in good shape. I was 195 pounds. I could bench 245, 250,
Yeah.
and so I was a beast. And today I look like a potato chip, but as a whole, it was awesome. And the Marines, to be honest with you, once you hooked them up, they were so respectful. They were, they weren't like, crazy people, right? They were just drunk.
You're right. Yeah, they were amped up. Yeah, and that's pretty standard. I mean, most of those guys have respect for law enforcement. I mean, yeah. I mean, but yeah, that's what I'm saying. Oceanside, just the crime rate was just through the roof. I mean, it was
crayon eaters. USMC mom, exactly. I love it.
Yeah.
Semper Fi, mom.
Before we start talking about the Alec Murdoch case, I did see. Have you heard the Maya Millette case? Any news on that?
Yeah, I talked to Mary Chris and Richard today.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, they've got a jury.
They have the children, right?
Yeah. The kids are doing great. And, I like staying in the background, those things because, it's been extremely difficult for them to get to the place that they're at. But they're there now. And, well, it's going to work out.
I'm glad that, that was one of the first cases that I started following you on, and it's a tragic case, terrible case. And just, her body's still hasn't been recovered. And he's not giving it up. He's not the type, he's just not a good guy. He's a terrible person. So I really hope that justice prevails there. So, Chris, a case that you covered and what we're here tonight to talk about is the Alec Murdoch case out of South Carolina. Now, this thing was done, adjudicated, signed, sealed, delivered, guilty as charged, lock them up. It's done. And then you start hearing these rumblings about a court clerk, the lunch lady or whatever she was, very inconsequential to the functioning, to the function of the court, other than she interacted with the jurors. And I think she was the lunch lady, right? Is that, am I wrong there?
The egg juror, the egg lady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she has interactions. She's interjecting herself. She wants to write a book, things like that. And all of a sudden, the Supreme Court of South Carolina overturns his guilty conviction, and we have a new trial coming up. When you first heard about that, what was your immediate reaction?
I always say, and you've probably heard me say it probably, too much, but I've learned through sad experience, that it only takes one juror. The prosecution needs 15, right? 3 of 12 and 3, alternates theoretically, right? They only need 12 in the box, but they really need 15. They have to convince 15 people, because if one of the other, jurors, gets sick or, has to fade out, they're going to put that alternate in there. So you really have to pay attention to 15 personalities. Now, think about that. How difficult is it to get 15 people just to agree on a YouTube channel?
It's almost impossible.
And that's a very difficult task. So that is what a prosecutor is up against. So in this particular situation, obviously, when you have 2 very sharp defense attorneys, I'll call him Poot and Jim, they're going to get up there and they're going to do whatever they can, to throw shade in every direction. I mean, and that's what they do. I mean, whenever you don't have a case, you always blame the government. Mm-hmm. And, the police or the evidence or whatever the situation is. And I can tell you, from personal experience, that that's one heck of a problem to go through and live through. I mean, some of the probably the biggest case that I've ever been thrown under the bus under is a case that I got called out, woke up at 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
So this is a situation that, now when I heard about, what are the allegations here? She allegedly told jurors, don't be fooled, but just one juror, not multiple jurors, right? Because they went through this whole system of voir dire, the juror again, the jury, and asked them, all kinds of questions about, did she influence you, Becky Hill? And the answer, from the majority of the jury, if not all of them except for one, was no. I don't know what you're talking about. And so they just needed that one. And that one has just turned into a reversal of the verdict.
Yeah. And that's unfortunately, I mean, I don't even say unfortunately, because I mean, if I was on trial and that happened to me, I would want it reversed myself. To me, the evidence is damning, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it was a major mistake for her to even discuss. I mean, to discuss the case, not a mistake. It's worse than a mistake. It's just flat out wrong. She knew better. she she had an opinion in the case, and she let it be known to jurors, which is never okay. It's not something that you should ever do. But all that hard work is now wasted, and all that money is wasted as well. And now they've, I believe, filed a civil suit against her, to the tune of $600,000,
which is a very dangerous thing to do right now, because what that does potentially is open Alec Murdoch up for Murdaugh.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point.
And then that Murdaugh can be used in his new trial, and the death penalties on the case are on the table. So, they're playing games right now. It's a chess game right now. And, they go ahead. I'm sorry.
What? No, you just really quick about the death penalty, because I think that's a very important part of this, because, I'm hearing, I think his name, Dick Durbin, I think that's Alec's lawyer. I think that's his name. But, he was talking about today how the attorney general is talking about the death penalty being on the table. Why this time and not last time? What do you have new information? Is there new, evidence, blah, blah, blah. And basically he's saying the reason he's saying that is because they're upset and it's vindictive, and that it won't be allowed to be a death penalty case just because the conviction got overturned once before. So, they tried it as not a death penalty case. And by the way, in South Carolina, this is absolutely a death penalty case. There's no question about it. I mean, they have the death penalty, they use it, and people can charged with lesser offenses face the death penalty there all the time. I think the reason that he wasn't was, because of his status and standing. I think that it should have been a death penalty case under the law in South Carolina. But he might have a point here. So why are you going to charge him with the death penalty now? And you didn't last time. And there are laws against doing that for vindictive purposes. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a game. It's a chess game at this point, because let's play this out. And, you've got now the defense coming out and going, well, we're going to chase down this DNA that we couldn't do. We couldn't chase it down the last time. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. They had the same stuff. They just chose not to spend the money. Okay. And so they're going, so the prosecution's going, fine. If they want to keep playing these games and they push this all the way to the Supreme Court, remember it was the defense that pushed this all the way to the Supreme Court. And they're the ones that argued that, she did all of these things, to sell her books, which, by the way, I have a copy of it over here. It's going to be a collector's item one day.
Yeah.
I had an advanced copy.
Yeah, nice.
And so they're going to have a return in terms of return on their investment, for lack of a better term. The AG said, fine, you guys have been playing games, then I'll play right along with you. Guess what? Welcome back to trial, and I may seek the death penalty. And in my, in my personal opinion, I could be wrong, but I think what that's going to do is create this dialogue behind the house to where it may not be a first, but, Alex may come to the table and say, well, we want a second. I didn't intentionally mean to kill them, which of course is, hogwash. He's already been convicted. And you'll notice the defense today, even in the press conference, came out and said, Alex feels great that he's no longer a convicted murderer. you know,
And he feels great and good.
yeah. How much is a piece of rock cocaine, and where do I get the pipe? Quickly.
Well, I mean, he's very foolish because there's nothing to be happy about. I mean, his wife and son were brutally murdered. I get on, it's a technicality, but that's just him. He's very, he's all about Alec. He admits all these things that he did wrong, all of them, right? The ripping off clients, ripping off his partners, ripping off his friends. And then not to go into just, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of what led up to this, and then the pills and the drug addictions and this and that. But the one thing that he will, I believe, I don't think that he will ever plead. I think that that's what this death penalty thing is. Maybe let's see if we can get a plea deal out of him. I don't think that they're going to get a plea deal out of him. But the one thing that he will not admit, and he'll never admit, is the fact that he murdered his wife and son. And I think in a lot of cases, motive doesn't matter, but in this case, motive absolutely matters, because he was on the cusp of losing everything and being exposed for everything, all his wrongdoings, the money, the house of cards was falling apart. He was about to be sued into oblivion with the boat wreck from Paul, which I think that he was angry at Paul for, because he was manipulating things behind the scenes there. But the fact that he would sit there and say now, that he feels great that he's no longer a convicted murderer. Well, he's about to go back on trial. And, is there any, you watched the first trial just the same way that I did. Who benefits? Obviously, this is a big win for Alec, but when retrying a case like this, to me, it only benefits the defense in a major way.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, remember Karen and I were living in South Carolina, and we were in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, which is just across the bridge, the Ravenel Bridge in Charleston. And, I was doing some work out there. I spent about 5 years there, and all of this stuff had gone down. So I actually went to the crime scene. I mean, I did all of that stuff, shortly thereafter. And in this particular situation, I just, I have to say that this guy is extremely dangerous. And I'm not just talking a little dangerous. I'm talking extremely dangerous. If you think about the totality of the circumstances, let's just take what we heard in that trial to your point. This gentleman executed his son. He didn't just shoot him once. He shot him with a very dangerous, shotgun, a weapon. And not just, he hit him first in the upper chest area. And then as his son bent over, he hit him again, to the point where, it was just horrific. And simultaneously, the boy's mother is running at her child, and he executes her he drops the shotgun and picks up another weapon that he had at the ready and executes her. And then he goes into this persona to the point where when he got on the stand, remember he had the tears and the snot coming out of his nose, and
Oh,
all
yeah.
the other stuff, right? This guy is dangerous to society. If he's willing to execute his family, who's he not willing to shoot or hurt? And that's what makes him, you know, a unique. He annihilated his family, half of his family. He's got one son left.
Why do you think he didn't kill Buster? Was it just because he wasn't there?
Yeah,
That's it, right? I mean, I think if Buster was there, he'd have killed him too.
absolutely.
And Buster was he was like out of the house, kind of doing his thing. But I think that he would have killed everybody. I mean, one thing that I am surprised but not surprised about was that he didn't do himself in at the same exact time. Then later on tries to, but it all really starts. Everything starts kind of going downhill when it came to Paul and the boat accident.
Right.
That's really what set off this chain of events. Now it sounds like, yeah, where Mallory Beach had died, and Paul was responsible for her death and responsible for the injuries of everybody on that boat. He had the alcohol issue that everybody sort of talked about, and
They sued the liquor store. It was Parker Liquor.
Yeah, I remember that they sued the liquor store for selling him. They sold him because he was underage. But
fake ID.
He used his brother's ID, I believe.
Yep.
And so you have this thing where financially, Alec wasn't in good standings anyway. He had already been ripping people off. He had been ripping off his friends. He's been ripping off his coworkers or his partners. And then Paul has this accident, I guess is what you would call it. But I mean, it was worse than that. Then you have him going to the hospital, allegedly trying to manipulate the situation, wearing a badge, a solicitor's general badge or something along those lines, with lights on his car. They were, I remember reading about this where the parents weren't even allowed to, get really close to the scene while they were processing it. And Alec pulled up with his lights on. He had those blue lights put on his car, and he pulled right up to the edge, and he walked right down to the bank, and he basically had carte blanche to do whatever he wants, or to do whatever he wanted, and ends up in the hospital ER trying to convince the other kids that Paul wasn't driving. I mean,
yeah, and let me tell you how weird some of the things were back, just right after and during COVID, and post-COVID, et cetera. Remember, this stuff is all going down, and 2021, right? So we're still kind of in this COVID area. But let me tell you a little bit about how crazy how it was where we were, and we were in the, Charleston area. So Dylan got into a rollover accident. He was broadsided. And by the way, I had a brand new truck. It was the very first day I owned it. And I asked him, take it out for a ride. He's 16. That's driver's license. And he says, "Oh, Dad, can I?" I said, "Yeah, take it. Go for it." It was a Ram truck. He takes it out. As he's coming home, a guy runs a red light, broadsides him, rolls him over. Next thing you know, I get a phone call. And it was like 4 blocks away from where we lived. And we're told, yeah, he's gone to the, children's emergency. We go downtown looking for him. Can't find him. We go to children's and they're like, "Oh, he's not here. He's over at the, the other hospital." So we run over to the other hospital. We can't even go in to see him. Okay. Now, think about the math here for a moment to your point about the hospitals. Okay. And we're like, what do you mean I can't go in? That's my son. He's in this hospital and I want to go, see him. And Karen's like, you need to just relax for a moment because they wouldn't let me through the door, okay, because of this COVID crap that was going on at the time. Okay. We were not able to go into the hospital and see our 16-year-old son who's in an emergency room after a rollover automobile accident. But Alex Murdoch can show up with a badge and pretend he's, a law enforcement authority and walk right into the various different rooms where the kids involved in the Mallory Beach, boating accident were. That is some serious juice, some power. Okay. Because my son is in the hospital. And by the way, he finally calls us and says, Dad, they want me to do a bunch of these tests. And now think about this idea. You can't make this crap up. Okay. He is making medical decisions outside of his parents, and they're signing off on it in the hospital. And they're having him sign forms at 16 years old. Okay.
Okay.
And
I can't even imagine. Your skin must have just been crawling, Chris.
Oh, you have Karen tell you the story.
I don't think I've ever heard this story from you before.
No, I haven't talked about it.
But I got to tell you that I know how I would feel. And I once opened up the back of an ambulance to try to get to my son when he had a seizure. And they were like, oh, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I was ready to go 5150.
Oh, yeah.
To be honest with you. But fortunately, I was able to, just kind of go with the flow. But long story short, he will, this is the kind of power that Alex Murdoch and his family have had for generations in that part of South Carolina. And so for him to go into the hospital and then start turning the story around into different directions, does this surprise you? When he sits in the front seat of a police car after just blowing his kids, brains out, and he's pretending, he'd already started to create the narrative that, it's somebody who had a vendetta, against Paul for the boating accident. And so they must have, selected that night to execute him and his mother. And Alec just happened to show up. Okay. And this is how dangerous this guy is, in my opinion. And anybody that would do that to their own child, you don't count. Nobody counts around this guy's orbit.
Yeah. Well, I also read that his son Buster is not happy about the new trial that's coming up. I mean, he's upset about it.
Well, Buster's, I think, scared of his dad because his father's not finished. I mean, you just do the math. He tried to lure Buster there that same night, but he didn't get him there. The mentality of an annihilator is the job's not completed yet. For Alec to keep playing these games now, hopefully he probably will never get out to do that. But right now the game is, he just wants to be cleared that he's not the suspect, even though 90 seconds after the video with the dog, okay, remember the chicken? The dog got the chicken in the kennel, and his buddy, right, Paul's buddy, had just happened to FaceTime him and said, "Hey, how's my dog doing?" And 90 seconds later, think about that. 90 seconds later, approximately a minute and a half, you're gone. You're dead. 90 seconds. In 90 seconds. This whole trial, if I were the DA, I would put in front of the jury a clock. And I would let it tick for 90 seconds. I would play the tape in the opening argument and then put the clock up and let it tick for 90 seconds. And then say, and this man right over here blew his son's head off. And maybe 10 seconds more, 5 seconds more, he then executed Maggie. And that's what this trial, that's the evidence we're going to present for you, because a trial like this is won in the opening argument. And then it's sealed up in the closing argument. I've seen all kinds of amazing attorneys that use, those kind of things. Obviously they have to, within reason for the court, if the court allows it. But, I'll just give you an example. I mean, even in the chat, somebody a little bit ago, I said, Parker's a liquor store. They go, no, it's a convenience store. Really? Okay. Did they sell liquor?
Yes.
But this is, so try to convince that person. Okay. I mean,
it conveniently sells liquor.
Well, that's how minutia things have been, well, maybe it's a water store. I don't know. What's convenient? I don't even know what that word means anymore.
Right. Well, this case reminds me, like the family annihilator kind of guy. You have Chris Watts, and there was in South Dakota there was a Gear Up. It was called the Gear Up scandal. There was a man named Scott Westernhouse who was embezzling money from a government grant. It was about to be found out they were going to be indicted. He went home. He killed his entire family, which it was like 4 kids and his wife. Then killed himself. Before he did that, he set the house on fire. And basically it was that he didn't want his family finding out, his shortcomings and then his failures and be embarrassed and things like that. And I think a lot of that is sort of what Alec was doing as well. But for some reason, I to this day, I don't understand why he kept himself in the picture, and took out Maggie and Paul. I mean, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, he's too vain, too narcissistic. I mean, just, I had a guy one time. So they were going through some fights, and actually it was an FBI agent. He and his wife were going through a bunch of fights, arguments, and she had, 3 kids, a 14-year-old daughter and 2 other kids. And she decided, okay, I got to get out of here for the evening, and left the house and took the kids to a local hotel to get away from the husband. While she was in the hotel, about 2:00 in the morning, a suspect broke in to the hotel and brutally essayed her for over an hour and held the kids and the family hostage in this hotel. And while the suspect was essaying the mother, he looks at the 14-year-old and he tells her, "You're next." long story short, we get called out because it was such a horrific problem. And I find out, I'm the case agent on that. I find out that the husband is an FBI agent. Now, we go to the trauma center, and she is with the SART team, and the nurses and everybody's in there making it right for her. But she's my victim. So I'm very protective. My personality is one of I've seen so many crazy things that, you know, I don't know, it's just in my nature. And so the husband shows up at the hospital, the trauma center. All the kids are in there, in different rooms, talking to forensics folks about what they witnessed their mother go through. And the husband says to me, he goes, "Well, I want to go see my wife." I said, "Well, one, we got to get permission from the doc before you go through any doors around here." Okay. And it's Scripps La Jolla, the trauma center off of, San Diego there, off of 5.
Yeah.
And I said, "So, let me check in, but, I don't think it's a good idea right now until the nurses come out and they tell us, what's going on, what time it is, because I haven't even, interviewed her yet, and I'm going to have to do that." And he goes, "Well, that's my wife." And I'm going in there. I said, "No, just hang on for a minute. Okay." He goes, "Well, I want to go see her." I said, "I don't care what you want to do." you know, I'd like to win the lottery. I didn't say that, but, I said, "So you're going to have to just stand down here, or I'm going to call your boss, and then we'll tune you up for the evening. How about that?" And anyway, reluctantly, he realized the position that he was in. And so one of the nurses came out to me, one of the SART nurses came out and says, "Hey, you know, Mac, now's the time. If you want to go talk to her, and you can go in there." And so I walked in, and, we chatted for a little bit, got some information. I shared with her, "Hey, I just want to let you know that, your husband's out in the hallway, down the hallway there in the waiting area, and your kids are fine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And she said, "Well, what does he want?" And I said, "Well, he wants to just talk to you for a second." And she's like, "Well, I don't know if I want to see him," and et cetera. And I said, "Well, you know, that's your call." And anyway, she eventually turns to me and she goes, "Okay, would you stay in the room and let him, maybe come to the door?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I'm here to help." So I go out. I said, "Hey, your wife wants to see you for a minute, but she doesn't want you to come into the room. She just wants you to hang out, by the front, the door, the threshold of the door. Can you do that? Out of respect for her and the trauma that, she's gone through." Meanwhile, I've got the suspect also back at the station. They got him in custody. Patrol got him. And so I'm thinking, okay, I got to get a preliminary, you know, what we call a cognitive interview from this 261 victim. And I need to hear, at least some things that are going to help me, put this guy in prison for the rest of his life. And so I said to him, I said, "Look, can you do that? Can we have a gentleman's agreement? You're an FBI agent, so you should have some type of, common sense here. which by the way, a lot of FBI agents don't have a lot of common sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of FBI agents in the United States.
Well, I'm not being
No,
being
big
critical of
organization.
all
Yeah, yeah.
FBI agents. I'm just saying, remember, they're accountants with guns,
Right. It's a huge organization.
right? And lawyers with guns. So you do the math on that, okay? And so I said to him, I said, look, I just need you to chill. And he goes, Dad, no problem, no problem. He comes in to the room, to the doorway, because I was ahead of him. And I stopped for a second. I turned around and he goes, quote, I'll never forget this for the rest of my life. What did you get yourself into tonight? I swear. I was like, what did you just say? I grabbed him around the upper lapel and I pushed him into the hallway. And the orderlies, everybody came over. It's like, holy crap, this guy is, they're going to start fighting. Okay. And I grabbed him around the lapel and I pushed him out into the hallway. And I said, you are no longer welcome here. Have a good night. Okay. He goes, that's my wife. And I responded, she's my victim. And I kicked him out. I had him kicked out of the hospital. Okay. Out of Scripps La Jolla. And if you're listening, you turd, okay. Yeah, I hope he is one day. I hope he's listening to me tonight because he remembers it. Because I remember it vividly. Okay. And of course, fortunately, she didn't have to testify because the suspect took a plea deal. And I know they got divorced. I know that for a fact because obviously we kept in touch, post all that trauma. But that's Alex Murdoch.
Yeah, same personality, same kind of person. Yeah, he's absolutely despicable, and that story is horrific. I mean, I can't even imagine having to deal with somebody like that. But one of the things that sort of bothers me is that there's all these sort of built-in excuses for Alec. That he's built in these excuses. One of them, his biggest major excuse to me, and I don't believe it for a second, is that he was this prolific pillhead, that he was taking drugs, that would tranquilize an elephant. He was taking so many. And I think, to me, the reason that he says those things is to excuse the bad behavior, the poor behavior, the stealing, the lying to investigators, the not having any real compassion or caring for anybody else. And I think that that's been his built-in excuse for a very long time. Do you get that sense? I mean, the amount of drugs that he says that he took almost seems impossible to take.
Yeah, it is. And but do I think he had an addiction problem? Yes. All right. And could it have been that deep in with opioids? Yes, but not to that extent, because remember one thing about opioid addiction, right? Your body over time builds up a tolerance. All right. And that's why back in the 70s, early 80s, the juice program became so important, which was methadone. Okay. And because your body every 4 to 6 hours, a heroin addict needs heroin every 4 to 6 hours just to function. And there are functioning heroin addicts in our society. I mean, I've arrested many of them. I arrested a cab driver one time who was under the influence of heroin, and it's 11,550 in the California Health and Safety Code. It said that was the and I had back in the day I was voir dired as a DRE, a drug recognition expert. This was early. In fact, you see that box right there? I just noticed something, and we haven't talked about any of this stuff, right, Josh?
No.
Did you see that box with the thing? Hang on.
Wonder what this is going to be. You can tell Chris is from Southern California, the no shoes. Don't tell him I said that.
Okay, so this is, I just noticed a certificate behind there. This is May of 1985. Okay. You see, it's DOJ, Department of Justice. Okay. And it's narcotics and dangerous drugs. Okay. It was drug and DEA. You can see that right there. DEA. It's got my name on it. Okay. And so in 1985, I went through the DEA School of Narcotics Investigators. Okay. And this was during the time of the cocaine cowboys. We were dealing with cartels on the border. Kiki Camarena had been killed, and tortured, etc. So this was part of my training when I went into vice and narcotics. Okay. And because, like I said, I was in vice from 84 to 86. Well, they sent me to the DEA school in May. I'm just reading this. It's been so long. May of 85. So there I was. And so I used to buy dope all the time on the street, undercover.
May of 85. I wasn't even born.
Don't age me, buddy.
I just think that's a long time to.
Yeah.
A long time.
And, but, I was buying tar heroin, from MA and the Mexican mafia, and working dope. But my primary responsibility was vice. So I was, working with the ladies of the evening and that kind of stuff and picking up, girls. They would ask me, I'd go to church and be like, hey, what do you do anyway? Because I look like a dirtbag. And, but it was the game at the time. And they'd be like, what do you do anyway? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I pick up hookers. And they'd be like, what? The pastor would be like,
that's a job.
What are you talking about? Don't say that in church. You're going to double E, whatever, HE double hockey sticks. And I'm like, well, you asked, I do it. That's what I do for a living. Oh my gosh, $20, $25, for tricks. Want a party? Oh yeah, I used to play the game.
Oh, I bet.
And it was both male or female, by the way, back then.
You didn't discriminate.
Well, I was a youngster, and so the older guys,
they liked you.
Well, we used to write our phone number to the office, to the vice office down in the bathrooms on the wall. And it would say, for a good time, call this number. Okay. You can't make this stuff up because that's how it was back then. And we had a bat phone. It was a red phone. We called it the bat phone. Just like the White House, right? And I don't know where they got it, but it was an old AT&T phone.
Okay.
And anyway, the phone would ring, And if you were in the office, in the vice office, you would have to pick it up and say hello, right? And, of course, then there'd be a deal on the other end and they'd want to meet you. And so if we were out in the field, our vice cars, I don't know if you remember, but all the high beams, you remember where the high beam switch was in a car from the late 70s, early 80s?
I think it was on the floorboard on the left.
Exactly. Yeah, it was in the left-hand corner of the floorboard, and it was like a little metal thing that stuck up, and you'd put your foot on it. Okay.
Yeah, that's what my grandma's Monte Carlo. The Monte Carlo was like that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, our cars were all UCs, undercovers, and that was not a high beam switch. It was a foot mic.
That's
so you would put your foot on it, okay, while you're, making a deal or something, and everybody in the unit, because we had our own separate channels, we were totally separate from patrol or anything like that. We could shut the patrol line off, so you couldn't hear. And the mic was up in the visor, and it was hidden in the visor. So you would put your foot on the mic switch, the floorboard, and now everybody could hear the conversation going on in your particular car. So for some reason, I was younger, et cetera, et cetera. When that phone rang, and if I was out in the field, I'd get the, "Hey, Mac, where are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, whatever, 3rd and Hill." She says, "Oh, okay. Hey, we got one on the hook. Run into the office. We're going to wire you up." I'm like, "Oh, crap. Are you serious, you guys?" "Yeah, come on, shoot over here, puppy." Right? Youngster. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So I can't tell you how many times I wore the wire to, go into games, either buy dope or pick up somebody. And anyway, I can't. And we had a van. We used to have a van. It had a periscope on the van.
Yeah.
Okay. And you crank this thing up, and it would come up, and you could sit there literally like a submarine, and I'm thinking, man, this is high tech stuff right here. Right. 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 And it was just a piece of crap. Like, the guys to be in there like this, "Where's McDonough? Where's McDonough?"
Chris, I can just see there's a hooker right there. I'm gonna get.
Oh yeah, it was hysterical.
Guys, you got some dope.
Oh yeah, Lance Corporal bag of donuts pulls up, and we're sitting in the van like this. Okay, we got one at 3rd and Hill. We got a B at 3rd and Hill. The penal code is 647B for prostitution. So, and you need, right? And you have to solicit for blah, blah, blah.
Look like hi-ho
for money transactions, right?
Hi-ho silver, away.
Right. And you see Lance Corporal bag of donuts, you say, "Okay, we got one coming up. It's a blue, Chevy, whatever it is." And then the arrest team, would be in another car, right? On the foot mic.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, where are they? What is it? It looks like some, Lance Corporal bag of donuts, and, oh, wait a minute. Okay, she's in. They're northbound on Hill. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you get into a little surveillance, follow on them. They go behind some of the X-rated movie theaters, and you'd wait for maybe a couple of minutes. As, you want the windows to start steaming. Okay. And then you'd walk out, you'd get out, your partner and you would meet, and you walk over and you tap on the, "Oh, sorry, buddy." You tap on the window, and party's over. And depends on what you had, it could be a surprise back in those days.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You never know.
Right before your eyes.
You don't have binoculars for that.
Oh my, no. Remember Transformers?
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah. So you never knew. right? And Lance Corporal McDonough didn't know until the vice guy showed up and said, "Hey, Frank, how you doing tonight?" Who's Frank? You mean Julie? No, that's Frank. And welcome to Oceanside.
Right.
Anyway, long story short, you negotiate a deal. You probably don't want your command knowing about this, do you, son? No, sir. Okay, well then, do you probably want her arrested? Yes, sir. Okay, awesome. You're leaving. You're leaving town tonight, and you take him down the Greyhound bus station, buy him a ticket, and say, "You're headed to Santa Ana. Have a good night."
Yeah. Wow.
Sorry, I didn't mean to digress, but
that was hilarious. That was a good.
I guess I should talk about heroin again.
Oh man. So this is a great question here, and thank you so much for the $5 super sticker. They said today that there was DNA under Maggie's fingernails that had not been sent to the FBI database to find out who it was. What do you think? Well, I vaguely remember hearing that Maggie had went to the nail salon that day of the murder. Do you remember hearing that, Chris?
Yeah, well, and that DNA is irrelevant because she was shot from a distance with a rifle.
Got it. Yeah, I don't think
matched to the rifle.
It wasn't like she was strangled, and that way, therefore, the DNA. That those are the kind of situations where the DNA would mean something. Is that if it was like an up close and personal murder? So I don't think, I don't think that it would be. I don't think it would matter at all, personally.
Yeah, it's irrelevant. I mean, a jury's going to go, yeah, but what does that have to do with getting shot from a distance?
But I think that's sort of, that's the thing that we're headed towards, because the big, like I said, the big winner in this is Alec and his defense team, because they've tried this case once, and now they get to learn from their case from before, and they get to tighten everything up. They get to correct the mistakes that they think that they made. And the fact of the matter is, though, the evidence to me, and I think to a lot of people watching this, and maybe to you as well, Chris, is still overwhelming. But I worry about these technicalities. I worry about, these juror misconduct type scenarios. And everybody's saying, not everybody, but a lot of people say, well, he's still in prison for the financial crimes. I understand that, but somebody needs to be held responsible for the murders of Paul and Maggie. It's a separate issue. It's completely separate. Now, I get it. He's not going anywhere for, at least, I don't know what he has up his sleeve. I'm sure he's in there thinking up all kinds of crazy stuff, trying to get everything overturned. But the fact of the matter is that he does not want to be known as the one that murdered his wife. He's doing his wife and his son. He's doing the OJ thing. He's saying, now we can look for the real killers. By the way, Mark Furman died today. I don't know if you heard that.
I heard it.
And people just saying ridiculous things about him as well. That things like that never stop. But Mark Furman was the one of the investigators on the OJ case, and but do you think that the trial is going to be? Do you think that? First of all, do you think it's going to go to trial again? Do you think that there's any way that he's going to plead?
I don't think. Look, this is a public relations win for the defense, for Harpoolian and Jim. I mean, let's just put it into context. they're celebrities at CrimeCon.
Yeah.
They've written books. They're on TV shows. You know, their egos is just as big as Alex's. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, people hate the reason I never get invited to CrimeCon is because I'm honest. I just tell it the way it is. I don't need people to listen to me. Okay, in terms of whatever. I don't write books. I don't have books. Okay. My wife and I, we have a YouTube channel. Okay. I tell stories like that, like I just did, about the Vice days. Okay. By the way, I have thousands of them, unfortunately. Okay.
What we need to do is we need to get you and John on here.
And John and I have some great stuff.
I bet.
When I was a dog guy. And and it's just like, that's why I'll probably never, ever get invited, because I'm honest about it. I just say, hey, look, I call it out the way it is. I mean, there are fakes out there, that pretend that they have all this, I stay within my lane. My lane was real simple. I was, a patrol officer. I was a vice officer. And then I became a dog officer, and then I became a detective. And, my last year I went out, I was a DARE officer. I was a school resource officer for 1 year. Okay. Which, by the way, I was a valedictorian at LAPD's DARE school.
I used to have one. I used to have one of the DARE shirts. And let me respond to this really quick. It says they should have big ego. They're defending the Constitution. First of all, you can have a big ego without, or you can have, you don't have to have a big ego to defend the Constitution. I mean, to me, that's just a ridiculous thing to say. The decisions, nobody's saying that it wasn't the right decision or the wrong decision. I'm just saying that whatever. I don't think that it's going to matter in the end. I think that he's going to be found guilty again. I think the evidence is overwhelming, but to say that they should have big egos, like why? Because they're defending the Constitution and making money hand over the fist while doing it. I mean, that doesn't say anything to me.
Well, Alex had a fair trial and he was convicted. So, okay, yeah, our system works. It's great. I love it. He gets another one. No problem.
Right.
But Maggie's dead, and so is Paul. And I always weigh into the victims. I don't weigh into the suspect. I mean, there are people standing at, Luigi's trial coming up here where they just, a judge just tossed some of the gun today.
I saw that, yeah.
And then these people are like, well, I don't even care if Thompson died. And that his 3 kids, his boys should be all about, they should be happy, that they have an inheritance from their father. Okay. You know what? They did that in 1933 and 39 too, for 6 years. And it was all about, that guy next door is Jewish. How do you get 1/3 of a population to put 11 million people into the furnace? By that attitude. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
We're going backwards in our society. We're going back to 1933 and 1939. And whether or not we want to agree with it or disagree with it, okay, why didn't people do what they should have done back then? And it took a war, World War II. Okay, I mean, this younger generation has not studied history. They haven't studied history. And so therefore, it's stolen land and all this other stuff. Okay, fine. It's stolen land. Who did they steal it from? The Spaniards? Is that who, the Spaniards stole it from who? And by the way, how did the list goes on, grievances. We're a society of grievance. Okay. And, these kids that are standing in line, these super fans of Luigi, they're super fans of Maya's killer, Larry Millette.
Yeah.
What about Richard? What about Mary Chris? her sister who's been searching for her body. What about that person? See, I always lean on Mary, Chris, and Richard. I don't lean on, this idea that, Larry's more important than Maya. Because I've stood over Maya's, too many of them. And the people that say, well, this and, the healthcare system for Luigi. Okay, well, have you ever stood over a dead healthcare CEO? If the answer is no, then you're on the wrong team. Have you ever pushed an FBI agent out into the hallway at the Scripps Trauma Center because his wife spent 4 hours being brutally 261'd and SA'd, and then the suspect leans over to the 14-year-old and says, "You're next"? Have you ever done that? Have you ever stood over a dead transgender and then fought for that individual's right to life because of their choice in their life at that point? No, you haven't. I have. I've done it a lot. Okay. And our society is just gone backwards in terms of who we fight for anymore. Well, he's due a fair trial. Great. Yes, he is. Okay. But guess what? Maggie's not going to be there. Paul won't be able to come through the courtroom and say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? Okay. No, none of that. And this is what happened in 1933 and 1939, up till 1939. This whole attitude was a buildup. We had 2 teenagers walk into a mosque today in San Diego and execute or drive by and execute 3 people outside. And 2 months ago, we had a guy drive into a synagogue in Michigan. Okay. These are precursor incidents, as I'll call them. Because remember, I was around during the days of James Huberty walking into McDonald's in San Ysidro.
Mm-hmm.
So as a cop, I've seen all of this stuff. Okay. And guess what? It's not getting any better. It appears to be going in a trajectory that doesn't look real good for the future. And until that, these incidences, until people stop stepping back and saying, hey, what's my neighbor's name again? Or love thyself as thy neighbor. Until we start thinking that way, again, it's not going to change. The trajectory is already written for us.
Well, yeah. And you do see a lot of that. It's like, you see the people going, well, you know what? He deserves it. Tough crap. It's the Constitution. Tough crap. This is, and you have these people that are so callous about the way that they just talk about it. Well, look, the evidence was there. I mean, the evidence was there. Does he deserve a fair trial without any influence from anybody under that's involved with the court system? Yes, of course. And Luigi's getting deals, sweet discovery deals or things taken off the table, and I would not be shocked if Luigi somehow manages his team to pull this one off, because there's this groundswell of people that it's not about the victim, it's not about the criminal act. They think this is a Robin Hood situation with Luigi. And then in the case of Alec, they go, well, it's not just a technicality. Paul got his head blown off. Maggie got shot with the blackout rifle. And Alec lied about being down there, about being at the kennels. And, but let's not trample his rights. Let's not, do him wrong the same way that he did so many other people wrong. It's sort of just how things have progressed. Look, this is the same stuff that's happening to my family. It's not about victims. It's about social justice. you
Oh,
know.
and that's the point, right, Josh? I mean, you're living it.
Yes.
You're living it. You
Yes.
just had a parole board, say to you through your father,
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it feels like to be going home to a family that doesn't want you there.
Yeah, I know. Which is unbelievable. What an unbelievable thing.
Well, I mean, instead of saying, Josh, I can't imagine what it feels like to have lost your mother 37 years ago.
Yeah, nobody said that to me that day.
No. And guess what? They didn't say to your aunt, I can't imagine what it feels like internally for you to see the executioner of your sister and then he shot you as well. How does it feel to know he's coming home? What does that feel like? I can't imagine what your grandmother is feeling knowing that the governor of California is going to make a decision potentially that could send the same guy home that executed her daughter.
Yeah.
What does that feel like? I see this is where I maybe differ with a lot of people in the true crime community because, I always think about Maggie going to the courtroom, Paul going to the courtroom. Alex is on trial again. Maggie's gone. Paul's gone. Your mother's gone. They're gone. This is no longer about victims' rights. This is always about suspect rights in our society right now, to your point. Okay. And we get that. Okay. But the scale of justice, if you look at Lady Justice again, I've preached this for the last 5.5 years on YouTube. Lady Justice has two scales. Okay. And she wears a blindfold and she has a sword. Why does she have a sword? Okay. That sword of justice is swung because it balances the scale. Justice and mercy have to be balanced. Okay. Have to be balanced. When we forget as a society that the scales of justice only lean one way, then guess what? Okay. We line up in the courtroom for just one side of that scale.
Yeah, well, and then right here, and Mr. Mann, I just want to say this. You say his rights or your rights. I don't need his rights. I've never been put on trial for double murder. I don't plan to be either. I don't need Alec's rights. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I get it. I'm not disputing that he has rights. I don't care about Alec. I don't care about his rights. They want to do the technical thing, and it is technical. Let's be honest, because 11 jurors said made no difference to me. One person said yes. And you want to talk about technicality of victims? Let's talk about Nicholas Cruz, who murdered 17 kids that day in Parkland. And then when it came to, and admitted to it, when they played the audio of him killing those kids, Chris, he sat there and he plugged his ears like a little baby and couldn't listen to it. And then 11 jurors voted for the death penalty and one voted not, and he got off. Now he gets to spend the rest of his life in prison because one juror. And if you don't think that that's a technicality, well, then we just don't see that.
Can I read one column just on the first page of my log?
Yeah.
Okay? Not the whole. I won't read the whole thing. Okay. But I'm just going to read, just this column here. These are my cases. Okay. By the way, these are homicide victims. Okay. There are multiple columns here on my log. Okay. But the one I always cared about was the column that I'm going to just go through here for a moment. Michelle Tate, by the way, she was 14. Robert Parker. Catalina Contreras, her head was smashed into the wall. Carlos Santana, he was a transgender on a telephone who was executed. Michael Jackson, not the real Michael Jackson. He was killed by Harvey Gilmore. Jose Carvajal, Dave Tabor, Theron Jackson, Dave Tower, Theron Jackson, David Tabor, William Johnson, Phoebe Campbell, Roderick Thompson. He was executed by a serial killer who I chased by the name of Antonio Estrella. That's the guy who went up to San Francisco. Remember I told you that story? Carrie Jones, Aguilar, Arando, Ronald Runenpop, Celia Martinez, Joseph Roberts, Florin Chrisman, Eliza Hernandez, Steve Simons, Flowers, Kenny Daniels, Antonio Galarza, Kevin Taylor, Rebecca Jensen, Oscar Correll, Devin Berman, Ernesto Flores, Reginald Boudreau, John Davis, Martin Flores, Lance Estes, Terrence Wayne, Cleve Ostrick. That's just that, and I'm not even down at the bottom of the page yet. Those are my victims. That's just page one. Okay. If I just keep going back here, I'll just, to some of these here, I'll just, Elizabeth Saunders, Karina Aldo, Maria Romano, Alina Baggett, Laura Brooker, Kathleen McElroy, and the list just goes on. Okay. And when I cross them out, that means case closed in blue and other colors. Okay. This is some of my case log right here. It's right in front of you. When I hear these guys on YouTube say, oh, yeah, this or that or whatever, okay, show me your log. Show me your victims. This is why I get frustrated and why I'll never get probably invited is because I actually have a case log and I can actually read their names off and their suspects, and I can actually talk about those cases. Okay, that's the real deal. Okay, this is the real deal.
Chris, somebody's asking right here what's your solve rate, and I think it was one of the best in the nation. It was north of 90%, correct?
Look, I don't have a friend by the name of Greg Cooper by accident. Hey, I don't make movies. I don't get TV shows and say, look at me. Okay. I got phone calls and letters from these victims in my file. I have these things like this. Okay. Things like all of these things about solving the crime. Okay. I have all these certificates of achievement. I have 2 life-saving award or a life-saving award. I've got all of that. Here's another log down here that, more victims. We had a lot of volume in my years in the Bureau. Okay. And because we, in the crimes of violence, I had, robberies, homicides. The other day I heard somebody say, you should ask these guys how many kidnappings there were, blah, blah, blah. And I went back and I looked at it. Okay. I had 14. 4 of them were homicides. Okay, that turned into homicides. And now, mind you, a lot of that were, prostitutes getting kidnapped and, held, and the list just goes on, right? And now if you go to Southern California in our old city, my solvability rate was 90%. And it didn't mean I could arrest you. I could put bracelets on you. It just meant that God was good to me and he opened up ways. And I have a personal belief, and it's just my personal belief. I've had many spiritual experiences where God has directed me into certain places. Have John tell you the time about I think it was El Pollo Loco, or down in the valley. It was off of Mission Avenue. A father of three had come out, and somebody had told me a long time ago, Karen's like, you maybe you should write a book about that, these things. I've always wanted to write a book. It was called I even had the name of it, The Thin Blue Veil.
Well, why don't you?
I don't know how. I don't do that, in my head. Okay. It's not, for me, it's not, they were very sacred events. It's about the people that have passed on to the other side. It's not about Chris McDonough. Even though I get, hammered all the time, whatever. Okay. Yeah, I can be a little prima donna. Okay. Just like the next person. But that's what made me different. Meaning I treat people the way I want to be treated. It just, just like the Lord says, love thy neighbor as thyself. But first you have the interesting thing about that principle is you'll notice God says, love thy neighbor as thyself. He doesn't mean walk by and look in the mirror every 15 minutes at yourself. Okay. It just means be good to yourself. And once you're good to yourself and you try to at least have this principle inside of you that says, you know what? I'm not a bad person. I'm an okay person. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. Just ask my wife. Okay. Ask my children. Okay. But I'm not a bad person. And then I can treat, a girl at 3 o'clock in the morning, a prostitute with a heroin addiction. And she sits there and goes, let me tell you something. When I was 3 years old, my father for 6 years, essayed me. And I can listen to that story and go, wow, holy crap. No wonder you're using heroin. No wonder you're escaping and hiding and running. Because that's all a pain mechanism, right? They're crushing that pain. And because I get that piece of the puzzle. I understand that piece of the puzzle because I've taken the time within inside of me to listen to my inner voice and God say to me, a lot of people don't know my story. When I was 12 years old, my mother had stage 4, terminal cancer. Okay. And I used to take her to the hospital. She was operated on at Peter Brigham Hospital in Boston. Okay. And I was told at 13, your mother had 6 weeks I was almost 13. I was told by the doctors at 12 years old, 13, my cousins and everybody back there, my mother, I was told she has 6 weeks to live. Okay. And I went through all of that math as a kid. And I did start a book, and I have a little of it, but it's more of my journals. I have journals right behind me. You see all those? That's my life for my children. Okay, not all of it, but I have journals going back to 1979. That's when I started putting it all on paper. And so I became this person, this kid, from the ages of 13 to 16. I wasn't a real good kid. I was kind of rough around the edges a lot. Okay. I drank as a teenager because I was running from it. Okay. And, I made some stupid decisions. But I also, at 19, had a very religious experience that said, hey, by the way, I'm here. Okay. And God showed me. And so that going back to that one story, and I don't remember if John was the patrol sergeant or whatever, but I got called out. This guy had walked out of this bar, and the suspect was in front of him, turned around and shot the guy, executed him, shot him right in the head and dropped him. And I got the call, and I, responded. I got there, and I found out a little, history about the man, just, he had 3 kids, family, et cetera, et cetera. And I went and I said a prayer. And I asked the Lord, I said, please direct me to who did this. I submitted myself. I submit myself to God. For all I know, I'm going to die tonight. I don't know. He gives the breath of life. I don't determine that. He does. So I try to go out. I'm hoping to go out one day with a clean slate. That I said what I needed to say. I didn't hide it. I didn't, try to dodge it. God is real, in my opinion, my own personal opinion. And I heard very clearly, drive. And I started driving. I went westbound on Mission Avenue. And as I got up to a street called Brook Street, I had the impression, turn left. And I turned. And I went over towards an area near Center Street. I went over the Brook Street Bridge, over the I-5 towards Center Street. And I heard again, Christopher, turn. And he used my name, by the way. And I turned. And I got halfway down the block and I heard stop. And I stopped and I looked over and I had the impression park. And I parked, and about 45 minutes later, a guy comes down a stairwell and he's walking towards a car, and I had the impression, and I hear, that's him. It was the guy. It was the shooter. And I get on the radio. I said, at the time, I think it was Ida 6. I said, Ida 6, I'm out on 1, the 400 block of Brooks. And I get out, and I'm standing next to this guy. I said, hey, I'm Detective, McDonough. I'm on the homicide team here. I said, what have you been doing tonight? And this guy you could see him just go, what the heck are you doing here? And he goes, oh, no, man, I'm just, I just came out of my house. I'm, going out. And I said, okay. I said, can you hang on for a minute? You match the description of a guy that may have been involved in an incident probably a couple hours ago. I'm going to have a witness drive by. Is that okay with you? He goes, oh, man, why are you detaining me? I said, well, do you have your ID? Is this your car? Because he's halfway in the car by that point. And so I'm, running the plate. And I'm calling for cover. Hey, I'm out on 1 in the 400 block of Brooks. I need the cavalry over here for a minute, maybe our 187 suspect. And next thing you know it, I think John shows up. I thought it was John. He's either John or Corky. And because John was a patrol sergeant at that time. And they pull up, and I do a curbside lineup with one of the victims or one of the witnesses from the shooting. The patrol gets him in a car and drives him up and drives him by. And it's called a curbside. And next thing you know it, the patrol guy, on the radio, he goes, dude, he says, that's him. I said, roger that. Hook him up. Click, click. Okay. My boss comes to me. I thought it was John. And he goes, okay, what the heck, over? I said, John. He goes, is it a God thing? I said, yeah. He goes,
John said that.
That's what he said. He says, is it a God thing? I said, yeah. He says, holy crap, Chris, how are you going to write this? Right? I said, I don't know. I'm just going to say, what happened. And of course, he matched the description, so that works. And that was the truth. And it just happens to be the guy. Okay. And next thing you know it, I'm sitting in the interview room and the guy cops out to the whole thing. And it was a real situation where, even years ago, when I was a dog handler, I I think it was 88. I had a shooting as I was at a door. The guy, but before I went into the building, I had this impression, and I felt, Christopher, put your vest on. And I had this bulletproof vest, and we used to wear these jumpsuits, whenever you got called out to do a search. Anyway, have John tell you this story. And so I zipped up, I put my vest on. I listened, and I always followed that inner voice. Women all have it, by the way. All women have it. It's just this piece of, that kept this idea of, they know, women know, and you women in the chat know what I'm talking about. But men have to learn it. We have to really slow our lives down to get that gut feeling and listen to it. So I listened to it. Some call it inspiration, some call it our conscience, whatever it is. For me, I just call it my inspirational inner voice from the Lord. And so I hear, Christopher, put your vest on, and I zipped up. Within 2 minutes, I'm at the front door of this shop with another guy, and I got Irk. We slide the door open, and the suspect comes up over the counter, and he starts shooting at us. He missed. Thank goodness he was a terrible shot, and he missed.
That's good.
So I hit the deck, and I let Irk go, and Irk tackles the guy in the back of the store, and I'm in the store. He's like 30 feet into the store. I'm into the store, and I'm gunning this guy down with Irk on the bite. And, years later, a reporter asked me when Irk died, how do you, attribute this dog's career? And I said, this dog saved my life so many times, I can't tell you, and anyway, long story short, the guy, within about 5.5 feet from me, took the weapon, and he blew his head off right in front of me. And I remember that incident like it was yesterday. The totality of the whole incident lasted, I think, around 11 to 12 seconds. From the moment I slid the door open to the moment he shot, capped rounds off at me, I hit the deck, I sent the dog, Irk's in on him, he takes the weapon and he puts it here, and he leaned back against a bookshelf, and a guitar case fell, and boom, he shot himself. And it was like, it was everything was like total slow motion. I mean, it was just like they talk about. And I don't talk about those things too often. I can now, I talk about them now. But the totality of, the stuff, there's no need. And I talk about the funny stuff, the crazy stories.
Well, and it's funny too, because when when people ask, why, it's not, I wouldn't say upsetting or annoying or anything like that, but that Alec gets another trial of, we're victim centric here, victim centric on the interview room. Chris and I have both experienced a great deal of loss in our lives, and we always feel that way. Not that it's not that we don't think that it's not fair, or that it's fair that he deserves a new trial or doesn't, or anything like that. But so much of this gets put on offenders' rights and not a lot of victims' rights. And the reason victims like Maggie and Paul don't have rights anymore is because they're dead.
Right. But they count.
They should.
They count. And we're already seeing the shenanigans, with the DNA, with Harpoolian, and all the stuff, right? The actors. There is, okay, they're doing their job. I get it. That's not a problem. Okay. That's not a problem. But at least be honest. I don't like defense attorneys that aren't honest. That's, I guess for me, it's kind of a push pull sometimes. I mean, yeah, defense attorneys need to do what they got to do, but they can ruin a lot of lives by lying.
And they do. They do. Yeah, I think about the Casey Anthony trial. They ruined George Anthony's life.
Yeah.
Tried to do it.
And guess what? They get a paycheck and they high five each other behind the scenes. Hey, we did really well. Okay, yeah, we lost, but I just made $5 million. Meanwhile, we've crushed everybody around it. And that's the end of that story.
Yeah. And by the way, George was a victim. He lost his granddaughter, and they accused him of essaying his daughter with no actual evidence. And then they also he's also been accused of being the one to kill his granddaughter. And that's a lot of the time where I think judges are the gatekeeper of these things, right? What's allowed in, what's not allowed in. I, for the life of me, still to this day, couldn't imagine. I can't imagine why the judge allowed that with no actual basis, And then the other thing too with this trial was, why didn't somebody speak up sooner? Why didn't a juror who says that they were swayed speak up sooner? They knew that that's what they were supposed to do. All of this could have been avoided and stopped, and somebody could have been replaced. Somebody could have been fired, but none of that happened for some reason. Okay, so yeah, was it improper what happened? Yes, but there's also guardrails in place. The jurors should have spoken up. That was their duty. I just don't understand that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the list goes on, right? To your point, Josh. I mean, just look at JJ and Tylee. Who talks about them today? No, it's what has the nut job done? What has Lori the nut job done?
I know,
right? It's not like, oh, by the way, yeah, they dismembered their children and stuck them in a fire pit. That's what she did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or as part of that, right? That's the game. And it's like, we've lost. When you talk about Lindbergh, okay, that Lindbergh kidnapping, you remember the baby because the baby was the victim. You rarely talk about the suspect. Okay. When our society, we're at a place now and we need to make a decision, whatever that means. We need to figure this out. Okay. Where, this is, Becky Hill, yeah, shame on the clerk. Yeah, she knew better. Absolutely. Okay. But what was her intent? That's the big thing. Okay. What was her intent? And now there's a shifting in the tide where it's all about, okay, even Alex didn't believe it, according to her, to Poot today. He gets up there and he says, yeah, when I was reading him, okay, he was reading the decision as well. He just goes and he started to cry. Alex started to cry. Okay. What was the snot coming out of his nose? And, was it, and the Oscar goes to, Alec Murdoch. And then Lord forbid, if you mispronounce the guy's name.
I do it all the time.
It's Alex or Alec. Which one is it? Okay.
I was explained that it has something to do with Irish heritage, and that Alex in South Carolina.
Why don't we just call him the killer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really.
Yeah. The killer.
Yeah, that'd be
That way we don't have to even worry about mispronouncing his name.
He's not a convicted killer anymore. Okay, remember that. Be careful. You're stomping on his rights.
Yeah. It all depends because I lived in South Carolina, for 5 years, and I was born in North Carolina, so I'm a Tar Heel. So depending on if you're in, the Low Country, they pronounce it two different ways as well. By the way, okay, and so Alex or Alec, depend on who you talk to.
Well, his closest friends call him Alec.
Alex is, again, here's right. This is really the point. Okay. People are upset about how you pronounce his name. Is it Maggie?
Scottish, my bad.
Or Paul? See, everybody gets those right. I don't hear anybody getting upset about Paul getting his head blown off or Maggie being annihilated with a blackout rifle while she's going to run.
Yeah.
Margaret?
Powerful too, man. Crazy.
And it's just weird. It's just weird. We've lost our compass.
Or Mallory Beach.
Or Mallory. What a beautiful that girl is. I stood at her gravesite.
Yeah, that was unbelievable.
And also I stood at Maggie's gravesite and Paul's gravesite. And guess what Alex didn't do? They didn't put a headstone there. Buster hasn't put a headstone on his mother's grave.
Why?
Great question.
That's weird, man.
Alec didn't do that. Alex hasn't done that.
Alec or Alex?
Killer. The killer hasn't done that. All right. None of that. And by the way, you can go see that on the playlist that I have. I stood there at their grave and videotaped that for the public to see. The public to see. I may jump in again on this one because
that's another thing that I was going to, because you had some great coverage, and then your guests on this subject were fantastic. Tinsley, Mark, right? Is that his name?
Yep.
Mark Tinsley. I've said this before, but if you ever, and hopefully you have him on again. I don't. Have you spoken to him since this is?
I haven't since the verdict, was reversed. But he's a smart dude. Him and his sweet wife Stephanie have a great podcast.
I'm really wondering what he thinks of all this. I mean, it'd be very interesting to hear, because he came up with Alec under in the civil attorney business back there, and I told you this just the other day. We were talking about this, but his cross examination, where I don't know if you remember it or not, when he was dangerous. Oh my God, when he ripped the defense attorney apart. I mean, he made him look like an amateur fool, and it was one of the most diabolical takedowns of somebody I've ever seen somebody on the stand do to a lawyer. I've never seen anything like it. I've watched a lot, and I mean a lot of trials, and I've seen a lot of testimony. I had never seen anything quite as, I mean, they would be foolish to put him back on the stand. And they probably will have to, because he was involved in the civil lawsuit, but Tinsley he was on another level. I don't know if any of you guys, you can just go watch that part if you just type in the Tinsley's cross-examination. It's just like music to your ears if you like that kind of thing. He's brilliant. So I know you had him on a couple times, and every time he's on, it's fascinating. So I can't wait
now.
Yeah, I can't wait to for you to cover more of this, and I didn't cover it the first time at all. And I kind of regretted it a little bit, but I was just more fascinated by the whole thing. I watched it, but I didn't really talk about it too much. Yeah. Mark the Tiger Tinsley. he was brutal, man. It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And one of the best parts was like when he had the order in his pocket from the judge, and he's like, well, it says right here on the order. He pulls it out, and the guy's just like, the defense attorney's staring at it, and he goes, well, I thought it was because the judge said, well, he's like, well, you interpreted, or he goes, the way that I interpret it, he goes, well, you interpreted it wrong. Like, oh man. And that just went on and on. So there's plenty of evidence there again to convict Alec or Alex or Murdaugh. There's plenty of there, but I do worry that it's going to be tightened up a lot. They're going to cut out a lot of the fat. Chris, on this last question here, and we'll get out of here. Here's the question. Do they let him take the stand again?
Well, that will be his decision, but I don't think if he does, just get the popcorn, because it's going to be a winger. But here's the problem. They get to use all of his other testimony. They get those transcripts of the first time he testifies. So if he deviates in any way, shape, or form from the very first time he testified, he's toast. And I'm talking butter, jam, everything just loaded up. You may even want to throw some cinnamon on it, because all of that stuff is going to get in there. And I don't think he'll do it, but I don't know with this guy. I don't know with him.
I think it's one of those things where it's sort of a game time decision, where depending on how they think the trial is going, the trial didn't go well for him. It wasn't going well for him. So, but he's such a like, he's in love with himself so much. And he's, if you listen to him talk and you didn't know anything about him, he just comes off as a nice Southern gentleman. The way he talks, he's very polite. He knows how to talk. He knows what he's doing.
So with Ted Bundy,
no question about it. No, but
remember Ted Bundy used to babysit, Francine Bardot's kid.
Yeah,
son. And he took him to the pool one day. You got to go watch that episode when I had Francine on. She's like, because she was girlfriends with Ted Bundy's girlfriend. And they lived 2 doors down from each other. So Ted Bundy lived 2 doors down. A lot of people don't know that. But she came on the show and talked about it. I convinced her one day to come on the show and talk about Ted. And Ted used to take her son and his girlfriend's son to the pool. And they took her one day. The son comes back and says, hey, Mr. Bundy bit me in the pool.
God.
And held me underwater. And she's like, what? So she goes to Ted and says, did you bite my son? What the heck? Over? Okay. Remember, it was the bite marks that
it did him in. Yeah.
Were part of so he had this fetish, for biting things. And Francine's kid, who's alive today, by the way, was one of the one-offs on Ted. So, who knows what Alex is going to do for all we know. I mean, he's got the propensity to shoot people. So
yeah, he certainly does. I think I'm going to start calling him Alex just permanently.
Yeah. I'm just going to call him the killer.
That too. Yeah. But don't trample on his rights, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it so much. It's a blast. Always having you. Like I said, it's like the old days, just us up here talking. We've been doing it for quite a while now, and it always feels good having you on and getting to talk with you, Chris. Thank you.
You bet, Josh. Aloha.
Right.
See you later, lab rats. Thank you. I'll see you on the next one.
Right. Bye, Chris. So fantastic time talking with Chris. Thank you guys so much. We'll keep talking about it, and we'll see where it goes. I want to thank you guys so much for the support, and please like this episode. If you could share it out, subscribe, that would be great as well. Guys are very awesome. So appreciate you all. And we'll catch you on the next one.